We actually need more healthy masculine energy, which is not the take paradigm that has been identified with the masculine for so long, but it is the generative masculine. It's the part that says, hey, I care about those around me. And real power in the framework I tend to explore with men is it's not how much power can I accumulate for myself, it's how much power can flow through me to empower those around me.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. Here's something cool I just learned. Guys who join men's groups often end up with better relationships, more confidence, and a stronger sense of purpose. And as a side note, I would add that guys who get a handle on those three things I just mentioned also have healthier bank accounts and get to take better vacations. My guest today is Jason Lange, a men's guide, coach, and the founder of Evolutionary Men. He's dedicated to helping guys figure out their challenges, whether it's relationships, work, or just life in general, by connecting them with the kind of support and community that actually makes a difference. He's helped tons of men step out of isolation, find their tribe, and become the best versions of themselves. In today's chat, Jason and I talk about why men's groups are such a game changer, how our modern society has totally reshaped what it means to be a man, and why having a solid group of guys around you can make all the difference. He even shares his own story of transformation, and it's pretty inspiring. So whether you're a guy looking for more perspective in your life, or you know someone who could use this information, stick around. This episode has some great takeaways you won't want to miss. Jason Lange, thank you for being here on A Joyful Rebellion.
I'm so excited to be here, James. Thanks for having me.
When I ran across your bio, you talk a lot about the importance of men joining a men's group and how different things are today for men, men's identity, men's mental health, and just some of the struggles that men have. And before we get started, I just want to say, I think about half of my audience are women. Ladies, don't turn it off, because if you've got a man in your life, you could gain some pretty interesting insight from what Jason has to offer us. So kick us off. You started this journey early in your life in wanting to create yourself into a better man. What started that? Because, and I know I just asked you a question and then you would think you'd start answering it, but for anyone who's listening for the first time, A Joyful Rebellion's about that time where you realize that you haven't been necessarily creating your life in a way that you potentially could. And then you have to make the decision, do I want to go to the effort to start being the creator of my life and not just riding the ride? That's where the rebellion part comes in, because a lot of times you have to do things you've never done before, or you have to do things that are kind of against either your upbringing or your current programming. Sure. And that's what we want to talk about today. Tell us how this all got started.
It's an important part of my story, and it's unsurprisingly then a lot of the work I support other men in doing now. For me, what really got me on the trajectory of what I would kind of call growth and change, right? Wow, I have to actively participate here in my life because it's not what I want it to be. You're right. It started pretty young for me, really in my teenage years. Like many men I know, one of the only things that is sometimes painful enough, as I say, to get us off the couch, to change, to say, hey, I need some help. I need something else has to happen here, is when we have pain around relationships, meaning we're wanting to be in a relationship, create a relationship, or stay in a relationship, and it's not working for us. For me, that started in my teenage years of just totally clueless with women, totally awkward in my body, had no idea how to talk to a woman, connect with a woman, and, seeing friends around me doing that and not understanding like what's going on with me. And that really kicked off my journey of like, hey, this doesn't feel good. What do I need to do differently here so I can have these experiences that I want to have. Luckily, I would guess in some ways, the trajectory that took me on was initially towards philosophy and understanding the mind and these kind of heady, esoteric paths. But through that, I actually got connected to somatic therapy and eventually men's groups. Things are changing a lot, James, in terms of just even the last couple of years and the work I'm doing and many men are doing. But for me, when I was in my mid-20s, this was mid-2000s. You say men's group, people are like, what are you talking about? Maybe some people had a frame of reference of like a church group. A lot of church groups will have men's groups. That's very different from what I do in some sense and what I got connected to, which was a group of men who circle up and put their attention on each other and what's working and what's not working in their lives. And it was in that context that things really started to transform for me, that I really started to understand myself. And in particular, for the first time in my life, in some significant ways, I experienced other men that I wanted to be like. I was around other guys, some older men, some mentors that ended up working with me. And, in kind of a hilarious way, it's like I'm sitting in the room with them and it's like, oh, that's what I want to be when I grow up. And it wasn't so much what they were doing, but it's about how they were being, how they were breathing, their presence, their ability to communicate, how in touch with themselves they were. I was like, wow, I've never felt that before, like in many of the men I experienced in my life. And that radically changed the direction of my life and helped me understand myself in some pretty profound ways and realize, wow, I have some work to do here to transform some of my patterns around relating and beliefs about myself. The men in that group then helped support me through that whole journey in a way that I think many men are so longing for these days, even if they're not totally conscious of it, but that could be so transformative though. Yeah, in short, for me, it really started with, wow, I'm not having the experiences I want in life. It seems like it's a little easier for some other people. Not that it's always easier. So what's going on? And turns out that path was, wow, I got to understand myself. What led me to feel this way in my body, connect with others this way, and men's groups and personal growth and change work were really kind of the path for doing that, which in some ways I feel really lucky in that as a men's guide now, there's a lot of paths to the work, but for some men, it's like they find success early on in life, whether it's with career or dating. And it's not until that midlife crisis that the internal world comes online of like, am I even happy? Did I just jump on the escalator of life? Do I even want to be here? It's a big thing for a lot of men. I had it reversed where I was trying to figure all that out early. And then some of my relationship and career success came a little later in life, but it's worked out to my benefit for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, if you can catch it early, amazing. If you've got that awareness, because a lot of people don't. A lot of people are going through the high school experience and then they go through the college experience and you get bumps and bruises. You learn a little along the way of what you do and don't like. But then you're right. For quite a few men, it's not until some crisis happens somewhere in midlife, if that's a relational crisis, if that's a financial, it could be circumstances in the world, loss of a job, that creates this need to explore a little further and maybe fill in some of the gaps. I saw something interesting in your bio. You are a certified no more Mr. Nice Guy. Dr. Glover, he wrote this book. I read this book years ago, and I want to take a little left turn down a rabbit trail for a second about something you kind of touched on, and that is the fact that, what's it been, like 70, 80 years now that boys have been growing up and their dads go to work and they go to work at some office. It used to be you'd go hunting with your father all the time. You would go to the farm and work with your father like every day, pretty much. Then the world changed. It changed a lot. So now the boy is growing up. He's either in the house or he's going to school. His mom is a female. His school teacher is most likely, in those days, I can only remember, and it wasn't until I got to high school, I think I had one, maybe two male teachers who weren't the gym teacher, that kind of thing. His contention is that there's a period in time where things shifted from boys being around men almost all the time and having role models that they could look to at a very young age to model what it was to be a man, to be masculine. to being around women and having to kind of just get through that experience as a child. And then they carried that experience, those coping mechanisms, into their adulthood, which started to create some problems. Can you talk a little bit about that? Take us back in history a little bit and bring us to the present day, because I feel like in this conversation, we're going to have another conversation like things are changing again with what it is to be masculine, what it is to be a man, and there are a whole lot of misconceptions about it. But let's start at the beginning with some of Dr. Glover's work and what you found to be true about it.
Totally, yes. So I do a lot of work with so-called nice guys, which I consider myself, and I don't use that in a pejorative sense, right? Like there's a lot of positives to nice guys, which I can get into. The kind of cultural evolution you're pointing to, I first read about in the work of Robert Bly, who wrote Iron John. He was actually kind of one of the real forefathers of the men's movement back in the 90s, like just really starting to speak to, hey, something is happening here and we're not putting enough attention on it. It was that shift into industrialized cultures, really, which made this huge shift where dad goes away to the factory and works all day. And eventually the whole kind of school system was born and kids are going to get sent off and sit in school all day. That was a tremendous shift. For a large part of human history, it manifests differently in different cultures around the world. But there were some general themes that many cultures, some of which still do to this day, would have this trajectory for the first years of his life. A boy was raised by moms and aunts and uncles and fathers were around, and that was totally normal. But then usually between the age of kind of 8 to 13, at some point, there would actually be an intentional shift. You know, this is quite literal in some cultures and tribes, a rite of passage. The men literally come and take the boy away from mom and take him out on a challenge or expedition, a hardship in a sense, where he marks the transition to manhood. But in another sense, that would often be where dad would take you and start to introduce you to a trade, his work in the fields, his craft, or whatever that might be. And in the process, you start spending more time with your father, with the uncles, with the men around you. You get to see how they interact with other men in the community, how they deal with conflict. All of these things are incredibly important for young boys to mark this transition of like, hey, there's a big shift happening here. But that all changed really fast. Once dad was going away all day, he was left with mom a lot of the time, maybe some older siblings or whatever that might be. And then eventually was kind of shoved in a school system, which initially did have a lot more female teachers. And so there's generations of boys that were raised by women and never had that handoff, so to speak, to be taught the ways of the man, whatever that might mean in your culture. And that's had a significant shift, along with just the idea of the school system. Boys in particular, kinesthetic learning is a big deal. We're meant to be in our bodies and moving. Boys tend to have a lot of energy in the need to move their bodies, get messy and use their hands. The kind of industrialized school system was, hey, sit at a desk for 8 hours and don't move. And that's particularly hard, I think, on boys in some sense. And we're seeing some of that catch up and start to change, thankfully, globally in the culture. But the process of that, you know, along with another cultural thing I'll just point to here, because they dovetail into this nice guy thing pretty heavily, is one of the major challenges a lot of men I work with, and myself included, have had. There's a lot of talk about what men are not supposed to be. Toxic masculinity, and this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. There is not much focus on, well, then what should we be? What's healthy? What's the role model? What's the positivity for us in our culture to move towards, in a sense? And that same generation of men, partly because they got to know their mothers, be raised by women in some sense, and just because of how clearly things surfaced in our culture, saw that this old archetype of the man, what I call the big three, and you can call it the macho jerk or the my way or the highway guy. This is a man whose primary focus is just on himself, and he'll do what it takes to get what he wants. There's a lot of power in that often, but those men in particular can sometimes be disconnected from their hearts and thus cause a lot of damage along the way. Whether that's environmental damage, relational damage, taking advantage of women, harming others, abusing the financial system, whatever. Over the last decades, we've seen a lot of that stuff come up through the cracks of, wow, there are some pretty brutal things in particular that men are often at the spearhead of. It's not to say all men are bad, but a certain type of man, this kind of macho jerk is what I would call it, or disconnected from his heart man. So there's a whole generation of guys who grew up seeing that. And many men I work with literally experiencing it, possibly through an abusive or volatile father. And they see that and they're like, whoa, I do not want to be that. I have no desire to be like that. And what that did was create a pendulum shift to, not that, not that. And that's one of the other origin stories of the nice guy, is a man who is aware enough to say, I don't want to be a man who causes harm, whether that's through my sexuality, my relationships, my relationship to the environment. Like, there's all kinds of things there. There's a coming online of the sensitivity of the heart. And that's a very positive thing in a lot of ways. The problem with nice guys and the birth of this, in a sense, is it's a bit of an overcorrection, where there's this idea of a nice guy who's constantly putting others' needs above his own, struggles to set boundaries, struggles to own what he wants, to be in connection with his desire, whether that's sexual or anything else in the world, and to just be okay with it, to be okay with conflict, to say, hey, I want this and you don't want this, or the way you're talking to me is not okay. Those are often really big challenges for so-called nice guys that don't want to upset anyone. We don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. We don't want to be like those other guys. And all of this is kind of, right, constellated in our culture to there's a lot of men that fall into this category now and are not sure how to get by in the world because they're like, hey, I don't want to be like that. And yet I'm trying to be this nice, caring guy and I'm suffering. I'm not getting the experiences I want in relationship. I'm not respected in my job, or I just don't feel empowered in my life. And that's not where all men are at these days, but a good chunk of men are like, hey, well then what do I need to be next? As with most things I say, one of the big prescriptions for that is get in a men's group and you can start to experience some of what else is possible.
I certainly have done enough work on myself to know that I spent my childhood trying to fly under the radar, everybody's radar, and just get by. Do what you needed to do to be out of sight, out of mind. No one would bug you. And that would let me go out and ride my skateboard as much as I wanted. Into adulthood, that translated into mediocrity, just going with the flow. And like you said, those boundaries, not wanting to rock the boat. So it's like, okay, cool. I'm not going to complain too loud if someone crosses, something that would typically really frustrate me. I'm not going to vocalize it. And that's something I really want to get into, how to find the best men's group, because I did start exploring that. It's kind of like finding the right therapist. You have to go through a few, and it's easy to find therapists. You can just do a Google search, but I feel like it's a little harder to find a men's group that is not connected with a church or some other institution that maybe doesn't reflect exactly your philosophy. So would love to talk a little bit about that and how someone who realizes, hey, I need more male influence in my life. I need some older male influence. I need to see what the young dudes are up to nowadays. How should I go about even looking for that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're right on the edge of this entering the mainstream in the sense that that's going to be a lot easier because it's just growing, and it's growing because men need it and men are wanting it and men are missing that kind of connection. Because in addition to everything we've talked about, there's just so many societal changes, particularly, I'm here in the States and there's this kind of cultural drive towards suburban privatization, just everything's separate. Let's just all be in our own computers. On social media, there is an actual force, in a sense, doing that has disrupted a lot of communal and public spaces where people get to know each other. Lots of men I work with work from home now. They don't even have an office to get lunch with coworkers or go out to the bar afterwards or whatever that might be. So there's this growing need for community, right, to actual interaction. And I think that's one of the gaps that men's groups are really filling for a lot of guys. And so where to look, you're totally right. I often explain this just like we could say, hey, let's learn to meditate. It's like, what kind of meditation? There's an endless variety of schools and lineages and thoughts. Men's groups are the same way in terms of there's a lot of different things that men's group can mean. For some groups, it's an accountability group. You want some help bringing something to life, creating something, moving something forward. It can be a practice group, which is men get together to do embodiment practices and deepen themselves. It can be a support group, right? Of, yeah, we're really just coming in and we're kind of sharing what's going on in our life. And it can be a mix of any and all of that in there. Finding a group is like dating in a sense, in that you want to try it out. A lot of groups will have an ability for you to drop in or check it out. These days you can do Google searches in your area, particularly if you're in a bigger city, men's groups near me. Meetup.com is a really good one for sometimes finding men's groups. The other thing that's radically changing right now is, although it's amazing when you can meet space with someone and have that physical aspect to a group, Zoom is really unlocking quite a bit in terms of allowing groups to connect virtually, particularly for men that are in areas of the world or the country where they don't really have access, right? I got lucky spending my 20s in Boulder, Colorado, and then Los Angeles. It was like whatever I wanted to do was there, like in this kind of world. But a lot of men I work with they're out in the middle of nowhere, and they're like, what are you talking about? There's no men's groups by me,
That brings up something I wanted to kind of touch on, because as a man, sometimes I would imagine, and maybe it's getting better, but even the thought or the word men's group has a connotation that is like, well, I would only go to a men's group if I've got something wrong with me. Like if I need to go to AA, or if I need to talk about some issue. Back in the day, like 20, 30, maybe 40 years ago, if you wanted to join a quote, air quotes, men's group, you joined a bowling league or you went out golfing with your buddies. That's what people thought. Oh yeah, I hang out with the dudes. I'm at the bar, or it's Cheers, right? That TV show where it's just these dudes hanging around and talking about life, waxing philosophical at the bar. And that was their idea of a men's group. But on the far other end of that is something like, the movie Fight Club, where, okay, I'm going to go to the men's group, but it's all about the extreme of what everybody thinks a man is supposed to do, is just be brutal and, defend his own, whatever they were doing in that movie. I love that movie, but it's a little cartoonish in the sense of what it's trying to get across. But somewhere in the middle of all of that are these men's group. And like you're saying, they're not necessarily there for some specific kind of support. It can be really generalized. So let's say someone they're listening to our conversation right now and they're thinking, okay, I'm one of those people who thought men's group, like that's only if I've got a substance abuse problem and I need that kind of support, or if I've got something going on in my relationship that I just need some awareness around. How do we make those people feel a little bit better about looking out on a meetup.com and what are they looking for that's going to keep them in their comfort zone just enough to step just on the other side of the comfort zone?
Yeah, well, this is a great question, because it's also pointing to a deeper paradigm shift that a lot of men, whether it's men's group, therapy, that's only people who have something wrong with them do that. And I just heard this the other day, but it's a new story I like, where it's like, actually, it's the people who don't go to therapy and stuff. They're the ones that have something wrong with them, in a sense. And what I mean by that is, I think most men could certainly agree. It's like, you don't just exercise when there's something wrong with your body. You exercise to keep it healthy and to keep growing, right? So your body, literally your muscles, they will only grow if they're put under stress, right? So we have to go work out. We actually have to go challenge our bodies. That doesn't mean you're unhealthy. You're actually doing that to continue to promote health. And I would say men's group and therapy, frankly, are a version of that. That it's just like you got to work out your body, you got to work out your heart, and you got to work out your mind, your mindset, and realize, hey, some of these habits I've built up aren't necessarily the healthiest. They're not the best. And the idea here is, sometimes we have to go to these things because something is really going wrong in our life, or we have an acute illness of some kind, right? And we go get fixed. Other times it's like, no, I want to keep myself healthy. So I'm going to keep working myself out to grow and deepen. And so men's group is really about that. It's about taking control of our life and bringing more intention to it, right? What am I doing? What do I want to be doing? Why am I doing it? What gets in the way? These questions that a lot of men, until they have some kind of big life event or midlife crisis, don't pause to ask themselves. A lot of guys step onto the conveyor belt of life of, oh, this is what you're supposed to do. Da-da-da, get a job, da-da-da, get married, whatever that might be. And they've never actually slowed down to really get in contact with, well, what's going on for me? How do I feel about this? What do I want? So men's group can be a place to do that, where it can help us get clearer about what we want in life, what's working for us, what's not working for us, and what our trajectory is, in a sense. And the power of that is what I've seen in my own life, James, and many men I've worked with, is the guys I know in men's group, they make more money, they have better relationships, they're happier in life. Like, things get better. They don't get easier, as I say, but they get better. Like, because we're bringing more consciousness to the things that are most important to us. So I think it's the shift, in a sense, of, a men's group. It's about like training yourself. It's about getting the training we need to effectively deal with life and to have a plan and kind of move towards it. And then to build a team around you. This is the other thing, I experienced in my life and now so passionate about is, particularly here in the States, we're fed this garbage myth of the lone wolf, the rugged cowboy, the hyper individualistic man who picks himself up by the bootstraps and does it all alone, never shows weakness, is always tough, right? And the truth is, it doesn't work. There is a whole swath of men that are dying at the bottom of a bottle, that are depressed and on medications, that have autoimmune disorders just flooding through them. Like, it's romantic to visualize that kind of ideal, but it's not actually how it works. And even in nature, as I say, right, the lone wolf is the one that was kicked out of the pack. And that wolf does not live as long. It will die faster than the one that is part of the collective. That doesn't mean, oh my God, I can't do anything on my own, but it means real resiliency in life is built up through community, right? And I think that's one of the things that a lot of men are discovering of, wow, trying to do it on my own for some men is literally killing them through stress, through lack of connection. And a men's group is a way to bring more resiliency to that system where we have somewhere to go when things aren't working, where we can be held, in a sense, in our pain. And then once we get resourced, we can go back out and we can deal with it, particularly knowing we have some brothers behind us who are on our team. They want us to succeed. That's, one of the great things about a group. So there is a mindset shift, right? The mindset shift is, no, I don't go to this if there's something wrong with me. I go to this because I want to live the most kick-ass life I can. And I need some support in doing that. Because if I could do it on my own, I already would have done that, right?
Yeah,
my life would be
happening.
perfect. Totally.
Right.
But we all need a little reflection, a little guidance, and just support around us. So for guys, looking, you want to try things out. If you can do a drop-in for a group and just get an experience of it, that's great. A lot of times you can, go on Instagram or this kind of world now and just search for men's groups, and you'll start to find teachers and people who are facilitating and, get to know them a little bit and see like, oh yeah, I feel like a yes to this. Okay, I'm going to try it out. That worked, kind of just like a therapist. Or I feel like a no to that one, but a yes to this one. And you kind of want to dabble around to get some experiences. You can also, before fully committing to a group, you can just start doing some men's work, which is really just this broad term for men getting together to do transformational work, right? To get to know themselves more, to become more embodied, to become more present, to get more clarity on their power, their purpose, and their presence in life. And then in doing that, you'll start to meet some other guys who might be in groups, who might already be doing things, etc. And then, the last thing I'll just share is, this is something I'm particularly passionate about and working towards really supporting men in, is you can always start your own. So if you're somewhere in life and you're like, wow, I don't have any men around me and this is painful and I need to find them. That is a huge clue that there is almost certainly other men near you in your vicinity or community that are probably feeling that same pain as you. And there's a real leadership opportunity there to kind of call things to order. Say, hey, to identify a few guys from work or in your community or in your network of like maybe friends you already have. This doesn't have to, start super complicated of just like, hey, I'd love to get together sometime the next month. It might just be 2 or 3 of you and just, spend 2 hours talking about our lives and getting real. That's it, right? The last thing I'll just note is the big shift here you kind of spoke towards was a lot of men by default, whether it's sports or activities or old social clubs, they relate via what I call triangulation. So it's me and it's you, and we build connection with each other by having our attention on a third thing, game, an activity, movies, whatever it is. So when we're spending time with each other, and you'll often see this with men, literally, we're not looking at each other, we're focused on something, right?
Like fishing.
Yeah, like fishing, exactly. And it's a beautiful way for men to bond. So I'm not saying there's not a time and place for that. What I'm saying is all we want to add to some extent to the mix is some time where as men, we're turning to face each other. We're actually putting our attention on each other. And that's really kind of what a men's group is. We're putting our attention on each other and saying, yeah, rather than just kind of hanging out, we maybe sometimes have conversations. We're bringing a little bit of consciousness to why are we getting together right now? Well, we're getting together because we all want to be the most kick-ass men we can be, and we need help and feedback and support along that way. And just being the one to plant that flag can be really transformational, right? I've had many men who just, they have an intuition about a friend or two, they pull them together, and then they start meeting. And again, sometimes men come in with some skepticism, but it's pretty incredible to me that once a man is given the space where other guys in particular are actually paying attention and they're allowed to talk, most men have a lot they need to get out. They're holding a lot, and suddenly the floodgates come out and they're like, wow. I was just in one of the calls with some of my clients last night, and a guy shared this, and I've heard it many times, of like, since getting into this, like I had to drive just blah, blah, blah with my brother. And we spent like 2 hours together, and I ended up talking to him, like really talking to him. And I feel like I got to know him more in that 2 hours than I've known him in my whole life. Like we're connected in a different way now because we actually started to talk about what's going on in our lives. And so it's this capacity, whether you're in an official group or not, to drop in more deeply with other men.
Yeah. And based on that, I'd love for you to draw a distinction on something that I've noticed over the last several years, actually. And I don't know if I've just noticed it more because of the prevalence of social media, but what we're talking about here is a men's group where you would go and you would relate with men, the masculine energies, like you said, with the triangulation. It's not always as relational as it is about results. My point here is I've noticed this trend on Instagram, Facebook, mostly Instagram. Maybe it's because I get targeted with this, but it's these coaches, gurus who are trying to give men hey, here are the 5 things you need to know to be the most man-ass man you can be, and it usually has something to do with women. And I feel like it's targeted at men who maybe don't have a steady relationship or haven't had success in that realm of their lives. And it always kind of follows the same sort of quote, fake alpha male prototype. And I want to really distinguish, because men, it's easy for us to fall in that trap. We want the 7-step. Just give me the 7 steps. I'll hit those 7 steps. I'll check the boxes. And then if you're telling me I'll be happy, cool, I'm going to go do it. And if you gave them that, or the choice of, hey, come to this men's group for a couple months, it might be, something that will open up your eyes. They think, I'm looking at that 7-step thing that's going to get me there faster. And while it may be a lot of empty promises, it may not even work for them. And it's certainly the lone wolf model, because they've got this recipe that they're supposed to go figure out on their own. Yeah. What is your sense of this new culture of coaches telling men how they need, do 100 push-ups a day, do whatever it is that I see so many similarities with all of them. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I'd say on the one hand, like we talked about, a lot of guys, there's just an incredible hunger for guidance, like actual mentorship. Someone who's like in your corner saying, hey, I want you to succeed and I want to help you. And I talk about this in my podcast, but I kind of label this is just my take, but the father energy we all need is kind of how I say it. And to me, the most pure kind of fatherly energy there is, whether it's coming from a man or a woman, doesn't really matter, but it's about that kind of side of the coin is, hey, whatever's going on, let's figure it out together. So it's this idea of I'm going to jump in there with you. It's like, oh, that didn't work. Let's try this. That didn't work. Let's try this. What did you learn about that? Okay, that's okay. So there's like a space for things not working, but then there's a someone there helping you figure it out. And many men, myself included, never had that. So I was moving through the world, not sure how to do stuff, falling on my face sometimes. And then after you have a few experiences, of it not going well, it's like my body tightened up and I was so afraid to do anything, like to really live boldly or take action, because I didn't feel safe that if I failed, I'd be able to figure it out or do better or, whatever that might be. But another man, whether he's our father or not, joining us in that and saying like, oh, hey, you tried that. And wow, that didn't work, did it? But what can we learn from that? What can we do different next time? Men are so hungry for that. And there's a lot of research that's really quite moving that for young boys in particular, all it often takes is one interaction of this kind can radically change the trajectory of a man's life. Meaning it doesn't even have to be a father per se, but it can, in the best of times, it's like a sports coach or a teacher or an uncle or someone who just steps in and says, hey, I give a shit. What's going on? What do you want? How can I help you? There's nothing wrong with you. You just need to learn here, right? And there's like, oh, okay. That makes a difference. I don't know the etymology here, but it doesn't surprise me that, right? Mentor has the word men in it. Like men, we really crave someone guiding us deeper into our lives, right? We do want the instruction manual. We're like, I want to win. I want to be a great man. I want to serve my family, my community, but I don't know how. So I think some of that is speaking to this huge vacuum that has existed in our culture of this positive masculine role modeling, in a sense. We don't have to get into it now, but that kind of more red pill culture has kind of taken advantage of that and seeing there's a lot of really young boys that are hungry for something, and they give them this kind of, caveman version of it, I would argue. And the other thing I'll dovetail with is, like I said, for a lot of men, pain around relationships is so strong that's often one of the avenues you can kind of hook men in. And in a weird way, when I was in my 20s in the 2000s is when the game came out and pickup culture really exploded. So it was all these strategies and teachings and techniques for how you can get women to sleep with you, essentially. And a lot of it was quite gross. But inside of that were some of the kernels of the first time men experienced mentorship, community, and growth. So not everyone was like that in there, but there were some actually great teachers within that space. But a lot of men were going to that because there was nothing else. And now that the healthier manifestations are showing up, I think there's more options in a sense because, you want to be in a long-term relationship. You kind of want some mentorship with some men who have done it, right? Who are actually in thriving partnerships or doing well or in some sense. And some of these gurus, not all of them, just aren't there, right? They can teach about dating, but they've never been in a healthy long-term relationship in their life because they wouldn't know what to do, if they were, or have their own attachment trauma or wounding that come up. So, I tend to be pretty generous in a sense with understanding why people are pulled to it, but that then runs flat into, Instagram, social media, it's all quick fix culture. Like just do these 7 things and your life will be better. It's like, no, it's way more complex than that. And the downside, I think that particularly a lot of us guys, and I love it. I love podcasting stuff, but many men I see get trapped in is the information trap. I'm just going to listen to more, learn more, observe more, read another book. Yeah, right. I'm just going to keep absorbing. If I just learn this other thing, then I'll be happy or then I'll be free. Whereas information does not necessarily correlate to transformation. And that's where having a coach, a men's group, a therapist, someone who really gets in there with you to hold you accountable of like, okay, so you're learning all this, but how is your life changing? Where are you embodying it in your day-to-day decisions? And Instagram can't do that, right? Instagram doesn't want to talk about that. Even, kind of personal growth culture like I'm involved in, it's like, come to this weekend and your life will change. And I constantly have to burst the bubble that it's like, the retreat, the medicine ceremony, whatever it is, that's the easy part. I'm telling you, that's the easy part. You can come in, we tell you what to do, you feel so empowered, I'm so strong. And then you get home on Tuesday
You
morning.
go back to your sad, miserable life
And something doesn't go
figure it
right
out.
and you crash right back in. That is where the work really begins. And to me, that's why a men's group in particular is so potent, because it's woven in. As I say, my experience in groups is it's like a heartbeat. Every other week, I'm dropping in with my men, really getting a sense of where am I at. And there's no escape. It's based on like what's happened in my life the last 10 days. I had a fight with my wife, or I didn't know how to deal with this with my kid, or I'm under this financial stress. And that's where we really start to make these choices, I would say, that can really transform us. So, it takes work to grow and change. And I think community is one of the things I certainly experienced, and in a sense, my rebellion here is, part of my mission statement is every man should be in a men's group. I'm like, if every man was in a men's group, I think the world would get a lot better. A lot of the awful shit we see men do, I think it can be traced to isolation, loneliness, looking another man in the eye and saying, hey, I believe in you. You can do better than this, right? Like there's it's the kind of spinach in the teeth thing of like, it can sometimes be intense to take in, but most guys I know are actually longing for someone to give them honest feedback from a loving place of, hey, how you're treating that woman, that's not good, man. Like, are you in or are you out? Because I know you're better than this. Or, whatever it is, like that calling forward to be the best version of ourselves is what the world needs so much of for men right now. And women can't do that part for us. That's the honest truth. I think part of what we're stepping into here is it's us men that need to start calling forward other men. Not tearing them down, but saying, hey, man, you're missing some of the picture here. And I know there's more inside of you. And let's figure it out, right? Let's figure it out together. Like, let's get on this train.
That's good stuff. I want to talk about now kind of where this train is headed, because tell me if I'm wrong, but anyone who maybe is conscious enough about their own personal growth, who may be looking for a men's group right now, likely somewhere between 30 and 60.
Yep.
Are those the numbers that, okay, I just pulled those out of my back pocket. So if you've got tighter numbers, would love to hear them. But anyone 30 to 60, I would say probably 40 to 60 was from that generation. They were kind of raised with a set of parents, set of grandparents who gave us a very specific idea, masculinity, what a man was, and boys don't cry. Yeah. And you work hard, you provide, and you do XYZ number of things. And now it almost feels like, and this is what I want to get your opinion on, it almost feels like that pendulum, just like you said, the pendulum between the toxic guys and the nice guys, feels like that pendulum shifting. And I saw a meme that kind of perfectly described it the other day. It said, when I was a kid, I would imagine 2024, we'd have flying cars, not 72 different genders. And I'm just wondering how all of the talk around whatever they call wokeness is going to affect the work that you're trying to do now, get men to embrace their true nature, not toxic, not negative, not positive, just your true nature, and understand how to bring it into the world, because you can't fight nature. I mean, nature is nature, and every time we've tried to fight it, we lose, essentially. Yeah. So where do you see this train headed?
Great places in my mind.
Okay, good.
The work I do under the umbrella Evolutionary Men, right? And the idea of evolution is we take the best of what was, and then we include it in something new, right? So we transcend and include. So we want to take actually the best of the macho jerk, which is a man who can set boundaries, is connected to what he wants, moves towards the things he wants to move towards, can be fierce when he needs to be fierce. And we want to integrate it, right, with the nice guy, the man who's deeply attuned and sensitive to his impact around the world around him, who takes other people's feelings into account and their well-being. And we want to kind of keep growing that in a sense. So Evolutionary Men is like, it's this idea, what we're trying to do is kind of, there's this idea, James, of the man box, right? It's this term that was popularized by a coach out in Oakland. And the man box is basically the box, the parameters of, to be a man, you have to do these things. And if you're outside of that box, you're not a man. And so it's like a checklist. And it changes a little bit from culture to culture, but you're right. There's some pretty big things of don't show weakness, don't cry, always work hard, never ask for help, for a lot of men, it might sound a little crass here, but you should try to sleep with any woman who will sleep with you. And if you don't sleep with her, you're not a man, right? Because that's what men do. They try to have sex with everyone. There's all kinds of ways this manifests, and we're burst in that bubble. And what I say is, there's always going to be a framework per se, but rather than it being a box, like what's the foundation? What's the foundation for healthy manhood, masculinity, that then can look like all kinds of things. And part of what's so complex right now is all these old stereotypes are falling apart. They're not enough, right? Yeah, the man, he provides. It doesn't work anymore. Many women are like, I don't need you to provide for me. I make more money than you. Like, why would I need you to do that? It's very common. And for a lot of men I work with, they're like, fuck, then what do I do?
Who am I?
Yeah, how am I useful in the relationship? And
Right.
that's where we get to go deeper. We get to really go deeper into cultivating presence, becoming the emotional leader in the relationship, creating containers, direction, like all kinds of things. But there is a move towards fluidity. So fluidity is, instead of you have to be this way all the time, it's what would bring the most consciousness and love in the moment, right? Is it for me to step in and be directive? Is it for me to be soft and attuned to my partner? You can call these masculine qualities, feminine qualities, alpha and omega, whatever. It doesn't actually matter what you label them. It's kind of two primal energies that manifest in the universe, life and death, right? Feeling and perspective, as I say, yin and yang. There's so many ways that this kind of comes through. A lot of our gender identity are just kind of abstractions of that. But whether you're born a man or a woman, no matter what your genitalia is, we all have access to both of these energies inside of us. That's it. And some of us feel more at home in one, meaning when we're in that space, we feel more restored and we feel we can be more generous. But even that's changing in terms of, it's just getting a lot more fluid that we can go back and forth. I teach masculinity in a sense, and my wife is a powerhouse. There are many things she does better in her masculine than I do. So I don't lead those things because I'd be stupid to, like, oh, I'm the man, I'm supposed to da-da-da. No, you're better at this than me. So in this, I'm going to let you lead. But in other areas, I lead. And we have that flexibility, that fluidity. And the call to men in a lot of ways right now is to have that fluidity, to have an interpersonal, inner world, a sense, an emotional body, to still be able to take action. And because things are becoming more fluid, particularly in intimate relationships, paradoxically, in the work I do, no matter what kind of relational configuration you're in, knowing about these energies becomes more important. Because it's not, this is how you have to be. It's what are the notes that we can play with these instruments, right? So kind of agentic, coming forward, directive energy, that's a note. And it's a note that tends to reciprocate and sound really good with another note of receiving, being in the flow, being open, being deeply connected to what I'm feeling in the moment, right? Whatever you want to label that. In the most juicy relationships, we call this polarity, right? Like if you imagine a magnet, you need a negative side and a positive side, and then they get pulled together. You put two positives together, or two negatives, at best, they just neutralize each other, and there's no force there. At worst, they actually repel each other. And this work I'm talking about of cultivating a deeper masculine does not mean you have to be that way all the time. It means you have to know how to play that note enough that you can evoke a certain note from your partner if that's their essence and that truth. So that, the work I've been trained in, all kinds of couples and configurations work on it, because what we find, and maybe another frame here that again, isn't everyone, I'm not saying this is how it is for everyone, but for a lot of people, the paradigm of partner dance is really great. Lead and follow. You can't both be leading at once. You can't both be following at once. If you've ever tried to dance, like actual do partner dance, it's a mess. Leading is not better than following. It is not easier than following. It's just different. If you've never had that experience, go in and you totally give yourself over to someone and say, okay, I'm going to follow your guidance. It's brave as fuck in my mind. It actually takes a considerable amount to trust someone in that sense. Just like it actually takes quite a bit to lead someone as well. As for someone to say, hey, I'm giving myself over to you. It's like, oh shit, I got to be responsible now. And that paradigm is what we're pointing to here. That just in the moment sometimes, particularly if we want to erotically charge a moment, it tends to work best if there's a lead and a follow. And you can use any of the terminology you want here for that, but that tends to work. And in a fun way, we're so much more liberated. Just because we were born a certain way doesn't mean we have to be one of those anymore. We get to find what's the string of notes that works best for me and my partner. That's it. There's no right way to be. There's just this acknowledgement that oftentimes there needs to be that polarity in any given moment. And that then kind of comes into, maybe to tie it back here, I kind of went off a tangent. I'm pretty fierce in that this moment in time, I don't think we need less masculine energy in the world. We actually need more healthy masculine energy, which is not the take paradigm that has been identified with the masculine for so long, but it is the generative masculine. It's the part that says, hey, I care about those around me. And real power in the framework I tend to explore with men is it's not how much power can I accumulate for myself, it's how much power can flow through me to empower those around me, right? So a man on purpose and on fire, so to speak, is lifting up those around him and cares, deeply cares about the trajectory of the world. So for me, there's no such thing as toxic masculinity. There's pathological masculinity, which means it's grown the wrong way and it needs to be addressed and it can be brought back. But we need it. We need it in the world. We need men. We need women. We need all manifestations of beings showing up and saying, hey, we got to right the ship, because there's no guarantee with anything we're doing. So yeah, in the kind of the world of wokeness, I think that's all positive, because what it's bringing to surface are years and years and years of pain and trauma and boxes, but it's not enough in that we still then have to take some kind of action. And what I have just found is that for many men to be put in a group with other guys who have been risen in the same cultural context allows a level of safety to emerge where a man can relax and feel known in a way he can't otherwise. And so to me, that's more important than, were you born with a penis or not? It's what was the context you were raised in, right? Because in that shared reality is often where we can feel so connected and grow so much with other men. And it's why that, even though it's maybe not cool in some sense these days, I'm like, it's okay to just be in a group with other men right now. And that's a space a lot of men need, just like women need that space, just like transgender people need that space. There's something to when we're around people who have same shared reality as us, we get to feel okay. And we don't want to just spend our time there. We still want to interact beyond that, but it can be very healing.
That's good. So if someone's listening right now and they want to learn more about what you do, more about your work, maybe see what workshops and programs you offer, what's the best way to get in touch?
Totally. If you just go to my website, evolutionary.men, so it's not .com, it's .men, you can see all my programs, workshops, blogs, podcasts. I have my own show, and just kind of tune in. And again, I might be your vibe, I might not be your vibe. That's totally fine. But keep dialing in the radio to find someone that is your vibe, to maybe call a group like this in. Because partly why I'm such a big proponent of this is it's changed my life. I cannot imagine having gone through the last 20 years of my life without a men's group. And in fact, I have many men's groups now that have helped me through some of the most challenging moments in my life that I know I would not have been able to show up the same way in without those men. And it allows me to be bold in the world, because suddenly I don't have to be everyone's best friend, right? I know who I want my best friends to be, and they know who I am. And I trust their feedback a lot more than strangers, in a sense, right? That if they're like, hey, you're being an asshole, I listen to them because they know me.
Yeah.
They know what I'm up to, which in this internet connected age, not everybody online does. So yeah, you can go to evolutionary.men and just check it out.
All right. Jason, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and giving us so much info today we can take action on. It's like you said, taking action and growth is very different from just getting all the information possible. So if you're listening to this, whether male or female, if you've got a guy in your life you think could use this information, get it to him and maybe he'll take some action on it and have some growth because of it. So thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, so great. Thanks for having me, James.
Thanks for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this content and are thinking about ways to share your story or even get more joy out of your life, I have a free ebook that I'd love to share with you. It's called Plotting Your Joyful Rebellion, and I designed it to be a 5-step field guide full of guerrilla warfare tactics to help prepare you to overthrow any of the parts of your life you feel the call to rebel against. Go to ajoyfulrebellion.com and click on the link right there at the top to claim your free copy of the book. Again, that's ajoyfulrebellion.com, or simply hit the link at the top of the show notes. What sort of rebellion are you plotting right now? I'd love to hear about it. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or through the website at ajoyfulrebellion.com. Thanks again for listening today, and be sure to stop by next week for another episode full of joyful rebellion.